really is a legal engineer, and what do you think their role is at an organization?
Sure, absolutely. My base description is legal engineering is the application of scientific methods and technology to solve problems in law. I break it usually into 4 sections. The practice of law, so helping practitioners just be better at their jobs, whether it's being faster, more efficient, or generating better results. The courts themselves, so I mean, everyone has seen how Zoom has changed how courts worked. We never would have been able to make those changes were it not for COVID, and all of a sudden you're doing a divorce proceeding or a civil matter or even a criminal hearing via Zoom. People are saving gas, time, the courts are processing more cases faster. Regulations.
As a legal engineer, what kind of tech do you usually use? And particularly from the perspective of a lawyer, right, who's trying to also leverage tech, what can they really be looking at?
So at a very base level, we'd be considered a legal technology company. We work in the space of we call it language collaboration. We built the language collaboration system. So lots of people are familiar with contract lifecycle management, and that's generally focused on finding out what's in your contracts, because that's harder to do than you would think. Again, something else proven by COVID. People scrambled for their contracts, couldn't find them, couldn't find their force majeure clauses, stuff like that. We more help legal professionals manage their language internally of what they're working with, their day-to-day, we'll call it paper. So whether it is actually contracts that they need to put together, or whether it's HR documentation or handbooks or policy documents.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to understand what kind of scientific principles that a lawyer can perhaps start looking at, right, to change how they are looking at problems, or that can help them change their mental models generally.
Sure. There's definitely in the legal technology space an assumption that robots are going to be reading the language and figuring it out, that it is AI scan driven. And what we one way to describe that is sort of the airplane crash method, in that an aircraft, for whatever terrible reason, crashes. There's a very intensive process going in and determining what happened, why, in what order, what are the details, where are all the pieces. It's sort of a post-execution, a post-event mentality. We have a pre-event mentality. So we're more like, ideally the plane doesn't crash, and we are pretty sure it won't because we built the airplane.
And how did you get here, right? Of course, you're talking about the fact that you chose this, but what is the journey before the Masters of Science in Law been like?
Law side in specific, law students, there's a lot of great resources that I discovered that are accessible to law, like you need a law school email address. Hotshot Legal is one of my absolute favorites. So Ian Nelson, who I've met, is a great guy, keeps on building content in Hotshot Legal, but it is one of the best ways to train an associate quickly and at low cost, instead of putting them on a bunch of matters that they aren't competent on. One of the great insights from Hotshot is that they discovered partners were actually using it as well, because it's such a great reference. It's like, we bought this so that we could train the associates, and the partners go in and they're like, oh, that's how materiality scrapes work. Cool. But which is what they should be doing. They should be learning, but it's not just for the entry level folks. And unless I'm mistaken, I think there's still open access for law students. And that's just one of the things that crop up that are like law student specific.
Hi, Eric. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with Prolawgue today.
My pleasure.
Great. So for everybody who's tuned in, Eric is a legal engineer. He also is the founder for American Legal Engineer Society. And he works with this company called xMentium. We'll learn more about it later. Interestingly, he's also has experience in operations and project management, and has been a Marine captain as well. So we'll try to understand all about his journey, and we're going to get right into it. So, Eric, you have a bachelor's degree in business administration and project management, and then you moved to something called Masters of Science in Law. Can
Correct.
you walk us through what that degree was and how did you decide to do something like that?
Sure. So just to be clear, I had to make up the title of my bachelor's degree because it was in a sort of an adult study program at DePaul University. And the reason I finished my bachelor's at about age 35 was I was going back to school to achieve a higher level of education. So definitely with the intention of getting a graduate degree. And when I started, I didn't know if that would be whether a JD or JD MBA or something else, but I was exploring all options and had my life organized in a way that the sky was the limit. And so I explored a lot of options, and I was considering a JD MBA, and I found actually an advertisement for the Master of Science in Law program at Northwestern Pritzker School of Law, which is without traffic, I think an 18-minute drive from my house. So people came from all over the world to take the classes and to be in my cohort, and I was just fortunate enough to be very close. And from what I could tell, the extremely high quality of the professors, not only the tenured professors, but the adjuncts that they brought in to teach specialty classes, was just unmatched. And they were teaching everything I wanted to know, and were providing the business and networking connections that I thought I would need to sort of explore this space. And they were doing it in a one-year program. So I went full time, and I didn't get into the JD MBA, but I did work alongside folks that were pursuing those degrees, learned a bunch in the process. My year closed out with the COVID lockdown. So we did sort of like quickly ramp up online classes and finish out as best we could. And of course, sidebar is we had no graduation ceremony. And those of folks out there that follow me on LinkedIn might have seen only just 1 week ago, 2 years in arrears, we did a formal walking ceremony. So that was,
wow.
that was great. So, yeah.
And what did the coursework really look like? What were the main subjects and the ancillary subjects?
Sure. Fantastic question. It was a wide range of legal basics and intellectual property. There's a lot of folks in the program whose specialty is either coming from medicine or they're planning on applying and going to medical school. So there's a lot of classes on regulatory process. There's focus on developing, what does it take to develop a new medical product that you maybe designed or are working on at a company. You need to know, you need to understand entrepreneurialism. You need to understand probably how venture capital works if you're going to start a company, have a startup. You need to understand the when and where of what you should protect under probably patents. So they grounded us in a legal education, understanding the regulatory process, understanding contract law and tort law. But there were tons of specialty classes. So one of my favorites was taught by someone who described himself as a legal technologist, and I always saw him as a legal engineer, and it was patent landscape analysis using natural language processing. So this was an intensive 3-day course that taught me how to program basically in Python starting from zero. So getting the systems installed and learning the basic commands, and then scraping Google patents for certain types of patents. I think we worked on autonomous vehicle vision and guidance systems, so targeting that technology, and then using Python and visualization technologies to generate a graph of progress over time of applications of autonomous vehicle technology. And it was the overarching purpose was to identify where is the market now, where is it going? Mm-hmm. So if you see a peak 3 years ago in the technology and see it drifting off in patent applications, you can use that insight to guide where your company might be going. So things like that. I learned how to draft patents, so I took patent prosecution, and a lot of other Innovation Lab was another great one where we brought in computer science students from the other programs in Northwestern, namely the Master of Science in Artificial Intelligence program. And there were project sponsors from across the legal ecosystem. So law firms, in-house legal departments and companies coming to us with problems that they thought could be solved by innovative and software-driven technologies. And law students collaborate with computer science students and rapidly build prototypes and have the sponsors vet them and give them guidance, some of which have turned into real marketable products, right? So just, wonderful stuff.
Wow. And how did you get here, right? Of course, you're talking about the fact that you chose this, but what is the journey before the Masters of Science in Law been like?
Sure. Just over like my education and career, just sort of the background underneath that. I went to University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign for 2 years right out of high school, as a lot of high school grads do. Never declared a major, wasn't sure what I wanted to do. There were a lot of the large introductory classes, 600-person lectures. I wasn't focused. And at the time, there was a very large real estate boom going on. My family's involved in real estate. And so I had a choice of being maybe a little bit guideless in college or making really good money developing real estate. So I started that career fairly early in my life and did pretty well. I developed and real estate, built houses, built projects and developments for, I'd say, about maybe 10 or 15 years. And then I started to specialize in energy efficiency because there were new EPA guidelines coming on stream. And I concentrated on just developing systems and analyzing buildings for what their energy efficiency profile was like. That turned into a business consultancy. So I was consulting with a business, maybe they were a plastic injection molding company that consumed a lot of energy, had a lot of waste heat to get rid of, and had a building that they operated in. And it turned out that I was not just giving advice about, here's how you should manage your heat and your energy and utility consumption, but looking at the actual business process that a company was doing, right? And saying, you could improve your system like this, you could improve your flow and functions like this. And that pretty much shifted into more of a pure consultancy where I was just coming in and giving advice to organizations. And like I said, I sort of got some fires put out in my life. I got things organized, and I then had the freedom to explore what I knew I was almost always pretty passionate about, which is law, language, technology. So it was always sort of latent. There wasn't really a discovery or a really big turning point in my life where I realized this is what I wanted to do. I've just always been fascinated by constitutional law and the structure of the American legal system versus other legal systems. And I'm going to be completely honest here, the malfunctions in those. So if you're looking for a big driver, it's my experiences that I had in the legal ecosystem, sometimes as a plaintiff, sometimes as a defendant, or just in different situations, and just watching what the billable hour did and just watched how legal professionals engaged. And there was no better sort of impetus to improve the way the legal ecosystem worked than when I was exploring what graduate degree to get. And I was very much considering law. And so I found 6 people through various connections that were lawyers. Hey, do you know any lawyers? Talking to them. Hey, I'm thinking about a JD or maybe a JD MBA. What do you think? All 6 said, don't go to law school. You don't want to do that. Right now, it's too much money. I'm sure you can find something else to do. The follow-up question is, well, do you regret going? And none of them regretted going, but no one could actually offer the positive advice of, yes, go to law school and then maybe try to hang your own shingle, right? So that almost spurred me on more. If an entire trade, in my eyes, through my brief exposure, was saying, don't do what we're doing, it's a bad idea, there's probably some problems that could be fixed. And that's sort of my root-based state, is just problem solving, system analytics. I did a couple of accomplishments during the bachelor's program and then again during the master's program. So I'll close with, there was a requirement to go out into the world for the bachelor's program. And I'd always been passionate actually about, I live on Chicago, so the coast of Lake Michigan, passionate about boats and water, and I had experience on boats. So I got college credit to get my captain's license, which I upgraded over time, in addition to project management. So I'm a PMP, a project management professional. Got credit for that as well. And then post MSL, post my master's program, that was right in the middle of COVID. So I had a summer where no one was hiring, and being fascinated with IP, I studied for, took, and passed the patent bar. So I'm a patent agent also. One of my favorite things about that is that it never expires. So there's no upkeep, there's no CLEs. You're just, as long as you keep your address and phone number updated, you're a patent agent for life. So that's sort of covers my journey from start to finish, if that helps.
Wow. And you did mention that you had somebody teaching you who was a legal technologist, but you saw them more as a legal engineer. Can you tell us what really is a legal engineer and what do you think their role is at an organization?
Sure, absolutely. My base description is legal engineering is the application of scientific methods and technology to solve problems in law. I break it usually into 4 sections. The practice of law, so helping practitioners just be better at their jobs, whether it's being faster, more efficient, or generating better results. The courts themselves. So, I mean, everyone has seen how Zoom has changed how courts worked. We never would have been able to make those changes were it not for COVID. And all of a sudden you're doing a divorce proceeding or a civil matter or even a criminal hearing via Zoom. People are saving gas, time. The courts are processing more cases faster. Regulations. So I during my master's program, I really got exposed to how many regulatory agencies there were out there, how many rules there were to follow, how many different regulatory agencies a company might have to engage with and report to and derive data from. So legal engineering assists sort of that data flow. So the regulation part is you can't be submitting PDFs. That's just not going to work forever to submit to a government agency. And education is what I see the 4th branch is. So what do legal engineers do? Part of it is just training lawyers how to better use technology and how to innovate. And then I would almost say almost harder is bringing those schooled in technology over into law. There's been some fascinating conversations I've had where it's taken longer to explain how technology is applicable to law than I thought it would. It's partly because I won't say specifically lawyers, but the legal ecosystem has been so good at siloing itself off that most people that I've spoken with, if they're not involved in law at all, see it as something that can't be touched. Something that just like, well, I'm not a lawyer, so I wouldn't be able to touch or work with or work on any matters in law. So yeah, and then does that answer the question? Basically, what they do on a base rate?
I'm a little more interested to understand what kind of scientific principles that a lawyer can perhaps start looking at, right, to change how they are looking at problems, or that can help them change their mental models generally.
Sure. I mean, the scientific principle number 1 is the scientific method, right? So hypothesize, test, verify. There's so little verification, data analysis, and just cross-checking in legal practice. I'm still amazed to this day, right? You have a conversation with someone, a legal practitioner. Why do you do it like that if we have evidence over here that either you're generating bad results in the way that you're performing a certain function, or just not getting optimum results? You know, are you not bound as a lawyer to get the best results for your client as possible? And the default answer is usually it's precedent based. It's we did it before and this is how we do it now. And there's not really a way to hold most legal professionals accountable to failing to innovate and grow. I mean, yes, there's the CLE program where you're supposed to be getting educated. I think most folks would agree with me that it's basically a joke. I mean, there's learning to be done, but it's, yeah, I've got this lunch thing I've got to do. You know, I see a lot more sense of obligation and I've got to get these CLEs done than I see. I'm so excited to learn finally after 30 years in legal practice how to use Excel, right? Because they don't teach Excel in law school. Right. So that's my answer. Is the first principle is just being scientific about your job, right?
Mhm.
Like, look at something. Are you doing it right? Could you be doing it better? And if so, figure out the how and the why. So, and project management isn't really a scientific principle, but it's the logical application of process and planning, which also can be more widely applied to legal practice in general.
Sure. And I'm interested to also know what your day looks like at xMentium, and also if you could walk us through what really xMentium is.
Sure, absolutely. So at a very base level, we'd be considered a legal technology company. We work in the space of we call it language collaboration. We built the language collaboration system. So lots of people are familiar with contract lifecycle management, and that's generally focused on finding out what's in your contracts, because that's harder to do than you would think. Again, something else proven by COVID. People scrambled for their contracts, couldn't find them, couldn't find their force majeure clauses, stuff like that. We more help legal professionals manage their language internally of what they're working with, their day-to-day, we'll call it paper. So whether it is actually contracts that they need to put together, or whether it's HR documentation or handbooks or policy documents, it's all language based, right? And up until now, most paper used by businesses is stored in a G drive folder somewhere, or stored somewhere, and nobody knows what the current version is. No one knows who they should seek out for permission to change that document, or who the knowledge specialist would be that, maybe even if they didn't have the authority to execute a change, would still be the best person in the company to make a call on what that change should be. And we see negotiations the same way. So it's your counterparty is not your enemy. You need to collaborate on what the language is. Anyone who's ever done a red line email negotiation process as a lawyer with other lawyers, you're collaborating on language. You're just doing it in a very, very inefficient way with versioning emails and just all sorts of stuff. So yeah, we basically take in a large volume of a company's language. We hash out what the duplicates are. So I mean, we've found organizations that have 6 contracts that they have to execute simultaneously to begin a new customer engagement. And those contracts have sometimes the same clauses built into the same title, sort of the same language, but not exactly the same language. So you're giving your client sort of 2 different versions of the same indemnity clause in different places. And that's just sort of the legacy way that things are built. So yeah, that's basically what the company does is we help organizations provide a single source of truth for where their language should come from. We provide a working space for internally making that language as streamlined as possible, and then also enabling those organizations to work with outside parties, counterparties, and subject experts to really get things aligned.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to ask if you wanted me to jump into like what I do, or if you had a follow-up question, go ahead.
I had a follow-up question here, which is, all of this sounds really, really interesting, right? But as somebody who hasn't really seen a software work, how does it really work on the back end? What is the technology it's using, and how is it really reading the language in the contracts to make these assessments?
Sure. There's definitely in the legal technology space an assumption that robots are going to be reading the language and figuring it out, that it is AI scan driven. And what we one way to describe that is sort of the airplane crash method, in that an aircraft, for whatever terrible reason, crashes. There's a very intensive process going in and determining what happened, why, in what order, what are the details, where are all the pieces. It's sort of a post execution, a post event mentality. We have a pre-event mentality, so we're more like ideally the plane doesn't crash, and we are pretty sure it won't because we built the airplane. So we're much more on the early part of what we do. So we're not a big robot that you shove documents into and it figures things out. We have 7 or 8 legal engineers working at xMentium now that help customers get their language to a place where it's optimal. Honestly, there are humans in our loop, and we do have some technologies that can help them do that job. So in the analysis of the language and sort of helping that sort process happen. But it's a combination of human effort, machine effort, and the system as it exists. So yeah, it's a combination.
And so coming to your role at xMentium.
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed wearing a lot of hats, and I don't know if there are any more hats for me to wear. So because I'm a patent agent, I work closely with the developers and attempt to identify what we have as novel technologies and pursue the process of getting those protected. I am a legal engineer at the company. I work a lot less with the software platform itself and do a lot more public engagement. I've got a background in sales too. So when it comes time to work with customers, because I'm a project manager, I work very closely with our customers. So not just the process of like getting them onboarded and online, like, here you go, here's our software, here's your language, go forth. Organizations, especially large ones, will have a lot of different touch points that they need to integrate with our system. So I spend a lot of time every week in multiple meetings working with customers to understand what's your workflow, what's the workflow of the person that you're attempting to help or gain access to the language that we're managing, what's in the way, do we need to work with an API, do we need to work with some sort of a intermediary technology. Mm-hmm. So a lot of implementation, and just a lot of future planning. One of the advantages of talking to customers so much is to identify what their either current needs are that we're not addressing with our software platform, or what they will be in the medium and long-term future. And then that allows me to work with our product teams and sort of guide and prioritize it. You can't get everything built that you want. So you have to have your list of awesome features that you could create in software. And then your job is to just prioritize, what's going to make this customer happier, what's going to get us more customers right now, what's going to make this a long-term, successful product. So there's just a lot of strategy work there too.
And as a legal engineer, what kind of tech do you usually use? And particularly from the perspective of a lawyer, right, who's trying to also leverage tech, what can they really be looking at?
Sure. Everyone is looking for CLMs right now, CLMs and workflow tools. So everybody wants to know what's in their contracts. Everybody wants to streamline how you go from point A to point, Q in handling a legal matter, or even handling a business process, whether it's, pricing and quoting, or whether it's invoicing and closing things out. So those are the areas. I know a lot of consultants that work in this space, and we always emphasize the true basics. The robots are not going to solve your problems. There are no ruby slippers or magic wands in this space. You're going to have to deal with humans in your organization and get them aligned with doing things in a better way before you even try to do technological implementation. An example I give is process mapping. So you can't apply technology. You should not apply technology to a broken process. And we've done projects, or I've done projects in the past of publicly process mapping. So in a law firm or in an organization, you're doing a couple of interviews and asking the folks that are directly involved with the process, when this request comes in, or when you start this process, what's the first step? Where does it go? What are the decision points? I mean, just basic flowchart stuff. You interview 3 people, you're going to have 3 different flowcharts. So then they're all going to be different opinions about what they do. Sometimes they are, this is how I do my workflow. And so totally legitimate flowchart. Sometimes they're, I think this is what happens in this other department, but I don't know for sure. And you get a lot more opinions than you have people in the end. And when I said public process mapping, if you do those initial interviews and build out a process map and put it somewhere where more people in the organization can see it, and this is pre-COVID, you'll get people marking up the process map instantly. Like, no, this is not the subject matter expert that should be consulted for this matter. It's actually this person. This isn't the decision point. It's this. And you really do have to wind up understanding how to work with people and develop what I'll call averages of process and methods, because you're never going to design or attempt to implement something that works for everybody or that they think is the ideal solution, right? So getting stakeholders on board and just getting that process aligned is, and this is my answer to technology, is don't jump straight to technology. But when it comes to it, well, use Word, but know how to use Word. So if somebody's asking what technology can help me be better, you'll be better at your job if you know how to use Word better. If you're a legal practitioner and you work with documents, the same with Excel, you should know how to manage some form of numbers. I can't really give you specific, like what I work with every day beyond that which helps people in all sorts of different organizations. So project management technology, process visualization technology, all sorts of different, Snagit is a screenshot software out there. And it's, in order to explain and show people what you're doing, you need to take a lot of screenshots. So it's more about, I can't give you a list, but I can tell you that if you can identify exactly what you need to do, there is now a fascinating array of affordable technologies that are lightweight to implement to work with you on that problem. And I would say that the modern legal engineer, legal technologist, or even forward-thinking practitioner needs to balance that. You don't want to have 15 different platforms that you log into. You don't want to be sending your team members invitations to, hey, check this thing out in this new platform, and then they've got a new login. You need to have a certain number, but that's got to be managed, and you've got to make sure that folks are on board. And adding on top of Word and Excel, if you're an MS 365 organization, there's a huge amount of automation and business intelligence tools available via the Microsoft platform. There's a ton of stuff if you're a G Suite organization that you can use. So it's not about going out and buying that magic bullet. It's about, I think, first determining requirements. Honestly, I used to build houses, and I can't build a house for somebody that says I need a house. I need to know bedrooms, bathrooms, luxurious, as cheap as possible. Are there hurricanes, right? So I think that's my technology advice, is figure out where it is, what you're trying to do, what doesn't work about it, and what your ideal state is. And then you start to come up with a shopping list. And if there's one piece of advice I'd like to give, it's that folks should be wary of just checking boxes. So if there's a platform that says they do everything, like, well, we did what Eric said. We've defined all of these different ideal states, and we know we need these 12 different types of technology. Probably the technology, the software provider, the service provider that says that they do not only those 12, but 5 others as well. You're really going to want to look to see if they do any of those competently, or if you are not better off at cobbling together 5 different platforms that do a couple of things very, very well. And that's circling back to my company. That's what we focus on. We are not a checkbox company. We basically are cautious about participating in RFPs, requests for proposals, because RFPs are huge lists of checkboxes. And we try to concentrate in a very narrow niche and do what we do very well, and it's been working so far.
Great. And so I'm just going to take a segue a little bit, because we spoke about AI and we spoke about NLP. Just trying to understand in your words, can you maybe break it down for people, for our viewers, because there's a lot of misconception about what this really means and what is the potential for these technologies within the legal profession.
Sure. So probably best to explore. Not exactly sure your audience's knowledge level with artificial intelligence and machine learning, NLP, natural language processing, but it's all software. It's all software. AI is magical until you really get under the hood and you're like, oh, it's just software code that leverages other, pieces of research, or I'll call them libraries. Just someone has built together a very large data set of knowledge. And oftentimes an AI pipeline is literally somebody that programs, take this, feed it into this thing that somebody already built over here, then feed it into this thing, and then, give me a result of, what's the nearest match, or what's its categorization, things like that. I will emphasize that, again, it is all data driven. So it's not like you build a magical machine and you put something in and it outputs something. It's almost like AI is a learning robot, and anything that learns needs to be taught something. And so I'm really emphasizing data. And one of my data science professors who worked in innovation lab, Chris Hammond at Northwestern University up in the engineering department, he had this quip where he says, if you say you have the data, you don't. If you say you have some data, you have none. If you say you have access to the data, you don't have access to the data. And it's pithy, right? You're just emphasizing to make a point, until I really got into the industry and the real practice of understanding how pipelines are built. And it is absolutely true, because if someone comes to you and says, hey, AI, I want you to build me something, then the AI person comes and says, well, I need data. And so the person that knows nothing about AI says, oh yeah, we've got tons of data, and it's clean, it's in good condition, and we've got a wide range, and it's all been, vetted and looked at by humans. It doesn't exist. So I find that some of the best AI pipelines have been trained on large publicly available training sets, which are out there, and then are further trained for their purpose by watching, recording, and analyzing inputs as they come. So it's like, if you want AI to work in an organization, you can train it all you want on all of the legacy documents or whatever it is from that org. But if you set up a pipeline to collect new, clean data over time, that data is worth, to me, in my opinion, way more than what you had before, because there's always this danger of corruption. So yeah, I'll emphasize the importance of pipelines, not only in training, but also then in actual rollout. So when you have an AI tool and it's supposed to be connected to an application and analyze something that someone types, everything has to be connected on the back end. So that's what I see important. Did I cover the question fully, or?
So a little bit. I do. Let's just for the convenience of everybody who's watching this, is there maybe a resource, book, or a course or something that people can start with to better understand what they are really looking at when we say AI or machine learning?
Yeah, actually, one of the great course, I believe it's on Coursera, and his name escapes me, but there's one of the senior AI specialists at Google teaches the course. Yeah, I would have looked it up beforehand, but I'd forgotten. So there are free resources in understanding how it works. There's also the publishing company that puts all sorts of cool drawings on the front. So that's O'Reilly Publishing. So this is user story mapping. but they have a large selection of AI and ML books, and the authorship has been great across all the books that I've had, and it's very purpose-built library of books across lots of different highly technology-focused trades. But so it's not just like, they probably have a what is AI book, but when I refer to AI and ML pipelines, like they've got a book that's pretty much just like how to build pipelines, like how to integrate with different systems and what you should be looking at and how to design it. And I believe personally accessible to the average intelligent and interested layperson. So it's not so heavily grounded in techno jargon that it reads more like a PhD dissertation. Those books are great. So those are my two first go-to resources.
Got it. So you also founded the American Society of Legal Engineers. How did that concept come to you, and what is the aim of the society?
Sure, great question. So I come from an industrial background. Actually, my father was in the foundry business, so metal casting. So there's not that many more dangerous processes than getting a mold set up and then pouring molten metal into it. So I've been exposed from an early age in creating pipelines, as it were, like how to make a process work. And as part of getting my patent bar certification, I also got a qualification in systems and industrial engineering, and it was just piece of cake for me because I was just enjoying all the material and had that grounding. That meant that I had a general knowledge of the industrial and scientific world. So I know that there are many American societies, chemical engineers, civil engineers. They have conferences, they have educational resources. And the beginning really was in 2019. I was at Northwestern, and it was a conscious effort to bring people together from different fields and to have all sorts of seminars and presentations about, is AI the new law firm associate, or the application of AI to legal text, or just all sorts of great stuff like that. The questions from the audiences I was in that kept on coming up were, who is monitoring the ethical application of these incredibly powerful technologies? I mean, universally, everything I went to, it was always, well, when's the ethics question going to come out of the audience? Because people were, once you truly understood the power that you could leverage by analyzing huge data sets, Cambridge Analytica, the whole controversy with, analyzing people's Facebook profiles and then, basically directing them and influencing them to vote one way or another. I mean, just a huge opportunity for the malfeasant to affect, societal change, not for the better. And lots of people concerned about ethics. And the answer to the question of who's watching is no one. So to a T, at every presentation, the ethics question would come out and the presenters would say, nobody, absolutely no one across the world is monitoring the ethical application of artificial intelligence that we know of. Now, there's been, organizations that have sort of sprung up between then and now, but that amount of concern was only going to grow. And there didn't really seem to be a place or even the concept of what I knew that I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to apply innovation and technology to an industry that desperately needed it. One of my other background pieces is I know a lot of people in process design, design thinking, and like new product development. And so just looking at a problem and seeing how it gets solved. And I had met one person that called themselves a legal engineer. I had tried that with, like I said, my professor who considered himself a legal technologist. There was some hesitancy. People said, well, I don't know, is that a real engineer? To which my response these days is, well, engineers also drive trains, right? So there's a restriction that I discovered, which was there is sort of regulatory control over calling yourself a professional engineer. That's restricted, and that's my first caveat. But legal engineer has gained an enormous amount of traction in the last couple of years, and that's why I started it. Is that there really wasn't a place or a concept where people could go and say, who's going to help me effect these changes. And in the meantime, I've gotten calls from top 10 law firms, some of them implementing brand new innovation or legal tech departments and looking for LEs, we call them for short, at my company, looking for legal engineers. And sometimes I get the job description, which is legal engineer, and then included in that is 5 to 10 years experience. Right, which is, I made you laugh out loud because I've told that story to a handful of people, and they're like, "Isn't that like a unicorn?" I'm like, "Yeah, they're almost." It's there are some folks out there that have been working in applying technology to law for a good while, but they're so incredibly rare because this industry is so new. So that's, I needed to create a place that, going back to the ethics question, engineers have a code of ethics that binds them not just to their client, but also to society. Lawyers do not. I mean, and that's one of the things that bugs me is, those examples of, well, these lawyers were bound to their duty of their client, who had admitted to being guilty to a crime that an innocent person was incarcerated for, right? That kind of thing. I mean, it's like, hey, I get it. You represent that one person, but there's got to be some sort of middle ground. So that's really why I wanted to bring engineering as a discipline and as a thought sort of framing into law, is that it's not just for the person you're working directly for. You got to be keeping an eye out for society overall.
And since we just spoke about legal engineers being unicorns, right? What are your thoughts on the state of the current legal education, and how do you think it's evolving, and what can they do better?
Sure. Well, even at, my own law school at Northwestern, I was fascinated that, as far as I could tell, the JD program really had not changed that much in a good long while. But there were lots of forward thinking and innovative professors that said, we need to teach law to more than the people that are coming in as JD students. And that's how they created the MSL. And I was just to emphasize this, I was in the 6th cohort, right? So, I mean, that program is brand new. And they are demonstrating success for sure, because there are several organizations. One of them is a rapidly scaling healthcare startup that just keeps hiring people coming out of that program, because the skill set that's given to folks in that Master of Science of Law program is so directly applicable to what organizations need, that the grads are just getting hired by all sorts of organizations. Now, so that's great, right? That's literally creating an education program from scratch, analyzing exactly what needs to be provided to students so that they are competent practitioners out of the gate when they graduate, and makes them hireable and competent growing professionals. That's what education should be. JD programs are not, right? Maybe there's some JD programs out there that teach IP as opposed, or patent prosecution in general, as opposed to the really old school way of, well, good luck, we'll teach you a bunch of theory, graduate, and maybe if you get hired by an IP firm, they'll apprentice you and teach you what you need to know over the next 4 or 5 years, right? Another example, I did a mergers and acquisitions competition, sort of like a negotiation competition after my year in law school. And there was training involved about how does M&A work? How do the contracts work? What are the specifics of, buying and selling an organization? And I had practitioners telling myself and other participants that we'd be coming out of a program that took 2 months to do, like we'd be 5th-year associates at their organizations. Like, they're literally saying, you're learning in 2 months everything it took me 5 years to learn. And that was in an apprenticeship. I just keep calling it apprenticeship, but you're an associate at a law firm, not in law school. So there's all of these things that we know could be taught that aren't being taught. And my understanding is that there was a shift at some point in the 20th century, even more towards theory and away from practical exposure. And I think that is my opinion. absolutely the wrong way to go. And one thing I've been fascinated by is the sort of the mindset of law students and the type of people that are drawn to law is, a lot of the initial classes is teaching people how to think like lawyers, and it's analyzing something for all the possibilities and looking at what rules may or may not apply to a certain situation. If you meet legal engineers, and if you meet, and there's a lot of these too, people who were engineers as their bachelors and realized they also wanted to do law, they're already critically thinking and thinking analytically. They don't need to be taught how to think. They show up to law school and they're like, oh yeah, I get it. Okay, great. What else? Well, in your third year, you're not going to do that much, but 3 years is required, right? So yeah, I think personally, and I don't hope I'm not getting in too much trouble, I think there's a lot of things wrong with with JD programs in general. I think there should be a lot more practical experience. Some of that is like literally legal clinics are sometimes frowned upon. Like, we shouldn't be teaching law students how to actually practice law in law school. That's an older precedent-based viewpoint. It's not held by all law professors, but I have heard it said, like, we need to stick to just the ethereal matters and thinking like lawyers. And I'll emphasize again, that doesn't take 3 years. There's a heck of a lot more that could be pushed in. There's organizations like iFlip, the Institute for the Future of Law Practice, which got bought by the company that does the American, the name escapes me, but it does the American LSAT, the test that prospective law students take to get into law school. So that's an indication that teaching project management, data science, basic Excel and Word use are part of the 21st century lawyer's skill set. And again, that's a bolt-on program, not a set of 4 courses that get taught in third-year JD programs. So we know what we need to do, and those people that believe in the future of law practice know what we need to do, but the implementation in JD programs is hard. And I think, the bar associations can help. And I'm actually excited about the Arizona, Utah are very forward thinking in their regulatory posture towards legal service organizations. And I believe that's going to spread. We'll have some setbacks along the way of certain states saying, no, just let the lawyers do everything. But overall, there's going to be progress. So we could be here all day, and I can tell you how to build a JD program that makes an excellent lawyer out of the gate, that doesn't need to be an associate trained in every single thing that they need to do. But that's, I think a separate conversation and possibly a whole, semester's worth.
I definitely do want to pick your brain on that, perhaps as a completely separate conversation. But just moving on to the last few questions that I have here for you. One is a fairly controversial one, I would say, which is, what do you think about the billable hour? And is there anything in particular as a legal engineer you would want to comment on or about how we run that? Yeah, sure. I would love to, flip this around and have you better explain what the controversy is, because I don't see it as a controversy. I see it as a terrible way to do business. I mean, it is an absolutely terrible way to do business. There are a lot of folks that believe in it, and sometimes it is necessary. Sometimes you just don't know how long something's going to take. And I know this from having worked as in property development. An old example I used to give is I had a job where somebody had hired me to do a lot of work, and it culminates in painting the walls, right? If you don't get your customer to decide what color their walls are going to be painted, you can't proceed. And so do you bill them by the hour while you wait? I mean, you are incurring charges waiting for someone to make a decision. So my point is, a client could slow things down for lawyers trying to help that client by not providing documentation, by adding more requirements.
but the sort of the like concrete wall of resistance against we can't change the way that we work, it's ridiculous. I am just absolutely appalled that you can't walk up to a 15-year veteran practitioner and say, here's this customer, here's this matter, how many hours do you think it's going to take? It's like you did that 25 times already. There's a spread between the lowest number and the highest number. You can be predictive. But again, that requires the scientific method of looking at the data, analyze things that are happening, and going from there, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with billing flat rate. But if you refuse to do math, and if you refuse to do analytics of your own performance, and you are interested, I'm going to be honest here, you want to start controversy, like if you are more interested in making more money than you are efficiently serving your client with the best results, then bill hourly, right? And have that be your model. But it's shifting. ALSPs, alternative legal service providers, are not billing by the hour often. I mean, there's like rent-a-lawyer services when you need overflow work, that's fine. But yeah, you can scope a matter, you can estimate a matter, and you can even put in something that says, if things go crazy or if they go outside the scope or whatever, we'll start billing you, which is honestly, from my experience, the standard practice. Like, we'll charge you $300,000, but if X, Y, or Z happens, then we'll, in order to accomplish those added tasks, we'll charge you by the hour. So yeah, I worked with a legal engineer who said their goal coming out of law school, so far successful, was to never bill an hour, because that's just not how they wanted to work. And I think it ties into the structure of law firms, just the business structure overall, where most money is wiped out at the end of the year and divided among the partners. How is that good for clients? If a client comes in and says, hey, listen, you're dealing with the same matter that we had 2 years ago, but you're asking all the same questions. Don't you have all the information and data and records from 2 years ago? The answer is, no, we never invested in knowledge management system. No, we're not really that interested in accessing previous records or understanding what the previous lawyer did, because, this matter is different. It's a bunch of hooey, to use an older word. Manage your organization's information, manage it properly, and you can do a better job for your client in less hours. But if your interest is just getting over 2,300 hours for the year, then just keep billing.
No, I hear you. In fact, I'm sure, because you very often sort of interact with a lot of organizations that are providing legal services, including corporate legal departments. There is a massive shift in what clients are really demanding right now, which is why this is becoming more of a controversial question in that sense, right? Where law firms have very different incentives and are incentivizing different things, whereas clients want a very different set of services and skills to be offered to them. Which is why I asked this question. What other changes, though, in your experience, just working with different kinds of clientele and working as part of xMentium, do you see happening in the legal profession?
Well, like you've said, the shift to in-house legal cannot be overemphasized. In the last, see if I can get this right, in the last 20 years or so, in-house legal departments have increased something like 230%, whereas just lawyers working for governments or law firms have had a slow, more like interest rate type increase over time. So there's because there's a heavier regulatory burden, because there's just more work to do when your corporation gets larger, they've been hiring more and more in-house. And yeah, I've been seeing a shift towards less complex matters handled in-house, and more complex or geographically local matters being handled by outside counsel. And I've been watching that sort of bar keep going up. So the in-house legal departments are handling more and more complex matters on a day-to-day basis than they were. The CLOC conference just happened in Las Vegas, the Corporate Legal Operations Consortium. There was a big focus on storytelling, and that's what the leaders of CLOC wanted to bring to the table, was to say, you need to understand the people that are either working in a process or working with technology or what they need to do. You need to understand how they go about doing it. It's not just like, I'll refer back to the checkboxes. It's not looking at your organization and identifying what checkboxes are empty and then finding and vetting solutions to see where those checks will fill it. It doesn't work like that. I've worked with a couple of organizations that are, how do I say this, a little bit mired. Their existing profile of employees working in their legal departments and now in their legal ops departments, if they're not on board with truly solving problems, if they're what my father would call like clock punchers, like someone who they have a job, they have benefits, they show up, in order for them to get fired, it would take an egregious deficiency. And there's a mindset in legal and in the legal ecosystem that basically says you're probably not going to get in trouble for not changing. You're much more likely to get in trouble, to lose your job, to lose that bonus, to look bad in front of your boss if you do something and you fail, or if you do something and somebody doesn't like it. It's just that reticence. And so to answer your question of like what's been happening, those people are now getting cycled out. And so I was working with a close partner recently, and they've got a forward-looking CEO that's on board with making their organization work better, forward-looking managers and practitioners in their legal ops department, and then some that are just sort of in the way. And eventually now it's being realized that old mindset, you have to start sort of clearing the stables, as it were. And so, those sort of old guard of don't change regardless of what the situation is, they're getting phased out. So I would say that's even more so than technological implementation. It feels like we're in sort of a second phase where technology was bought. The project of rolling out that tech inside an organization was not planned or managed well, and it wasn't handled by competent or proficient individuals that are good with managing change, working with people, planning a project, and implementing, which are not, some of them are soft skills, but those are all great skills to have. It feels like we're now in like phase 2 of organizations understanding just how systemic some of their operational deficiencies are, and realizing they need to go higher up in the chain of their organization to see who has the power and the vision to effect change in an organized way, right? You can't just start lighting fires and see what happens. So that's been the biggest change is the perception of how much an organization needs to understand about itself and what they need to do and who they need to do it, because sometimes the people don't fit the role if the role changes.
That's great. I just have one last question, which is particularly for somebody who's trying to start out as a legal engineer. And it'll be great if you can sort of divide this both for an engineering student and a law student at the moment. Where can they start? Where can they start sort of figuring out what are the opportunities and what are the options to get more engaged in this sort of a segue between law and science and the scientific method? Sure.
So I might ask you to remind me where we are, but I'll start with the universal advice, which is whether it's my organization, the ASLE, or whether it's something else, COVID really drove a lot of connections in the world, honestly. And it drove the acceleration in the creation of a lot of different resources that weren't available three years ago. So keep an eye out for LinkedIn. I'm a big advocate for LinkedIn. If you start building your network on LinkedIn and you start following leaders in the space, and I'll be honest, the legal tech, legal innovation world is actually pretty small. And the people are, for lack of a better description, usually really smart and really cool and very willing to have discussions with those interested in entering the space. But I could see from the perspective of like, I'm a third year computer science student in a bachelor's program somewhere in the world. How do I learn more about this? Coursera is great. When you start exploring the space, you start exploring LinkedIn. So things that I've pointed out, there's formal degree programs. Let me see, I've got some free programs. So Bucerius Law School, they're in Germany. They often have a summertime like online presentation series. There's a lot of stuff available for law students as well, but things keep popping up so quickly that my advice is less, hey, seek out this specific thing, than it is start following those that know. So my mentor and one of my professors, Bill Henderson, teaches at Indiana University, Maurer School of Law. He's got a wonderful blog, and he's been around in the space for a long time. So if somebody asked me one thing, like, how do I start understanding this space? I would say, take a couple of weekends and read every entry in Legal Evolution, and that should be legalevolution.org.
ORG, yes.
Yeah. Which Lord knows probably you have posted on your excellent website, Prolawgue. But no, Bill Henderson is a connector. He's exited successfully from like a tech project that he worked on. Knows everybody in the space and not only has wonderful articles that he writes, but has great guest speakers that are all thought leaders in the space. And just starting from that web of looking at like the guest authors from there, where they work, what they do, what they post on LinkedIn, you start to see like, hey, this online conference is coming up. So that's what I would tell an engineering student is if you're interested, that's great. There's a lot of interest in sort of AI applications, but also just, I get notifications for legal tech funding, and it seems like every other day there's
Right.
This company got 13 million, Eversort got 100 million, Ironclad got 100 million. So they need developers. So if you sort of touch law a little bit in your internet research, like I described, and then find a legal tech company that's funded and is desperate for developers, if you can build code, I mean, just being able to speak to, I kind of understand some law stuff, but I'm a programmer, you're going to get hired. I'll switch over to the law side in specific. Law students, there's a lot of great resources that I discovered that are accessible to law. Like you need a law school email address. Hotshot Legal is one of my absolute favorites. So Ian Nelson, who I've met, is a great guy, keeps on building content in Hotshot Legal, but it is one of the best ways to train an associate quickly and at low cost, instead of putting them on a bunch of matters that they aren't competent on. One of the great insights from Hotshot is that they discovered partners were actually using it as well, because it's such a great reference. It's like, we bought this so that we could train the associates, and then partners go in and they're like, oh, that's how materiality scrapes work. Cool. But which is what they should be doing. They should be learning, but it's not just for the entry level folks. And unless I'm mistaken, I think there's still open access for law students. And that's just one of the things that crop up that are like law student specific. But one thing I'll emphasize is that even if something is posted as being law student specific, being a student in general is a great way to get into organizations. Like So for instance, I'm a member of the Intellectual Property Law Association of Chicago. It's one of the oldest IP orgs, if not the oldest in the country. Their student membership for a year is like $30 or something like that. So if you are a student, you have discounted access to a lot of different things, and you don't have to be a law student. Or even if they say you should be a law student, like I said, people are smart and cool in this space. So if you usually ask them and say, I'm a student in engineering and I'm interested in law, but I'm not a law student, but I would really love to get in, of course, like, we welcome you. So that's my advice is seek that out. And then, and then there's also day by day more like graduate school opportunities, like my MSL or Vanderbilt or, Colorado or Stanford or lots of places.
Great. I think that was great advice. We'll put links to everything that you've spoken about in the description so people can.
You might as well just point people to Prolawgue and say everything you mentioned is somewhere in Prolawgue. Which, hey, you know what? For the record, let me end with this. If you're a student looking for stuff, I was just perusing your menu of upcoming events like today. It's one. There were stuff I was like, oh, I didn't know that was happening. I want to sign up for that. And I thought I was on their mailing list. So. Your site is wonderful, and that would be next, probably next to Bill Henderson's Legal Evolution is check out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're a connector. You've got everything in there. I'm jealous.
Thank you so much. So that's the last question that I had for you, Eric. Are there any parting thoughts you have for us?
Not besides the fact that this space is due to explode, for lack of a better word. There's going to be a lot of motion and a lot of growth. I mentioned all the funding. So I welcome folks to join my organization if they like. I've been trying to put out a newsletter, but as I present to most people, if they have something of interest that they'd like to get published on the site, on my blog, I'm more than open to opportunities to do that and to be a connector in the space. So just encourage everybody that's interested in what you're presenting to say, you're doing the right thing, you're in the right place, and the sky's the limit.
Great. Thank you so much for taking out the time today, Eric. This was quite an insightful conversation, even for me. Thank you so much. I hope more people sort of enter the engineering and legal space and work on the intersection of things, because usually it's at these intersections where some brilliant things sort of end up happening.
Agreed. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.